Stop! Don't sign it! The scream came from the black woman serving wine. Her voice shattered the silence of the billionaire's boardroom. Every head turned. The billionaire froze. His signature was one stroke away from signing. Her hands were shaking as she pointed at the contracts. And the next words she uttered made the room explode. She reached into her apron and pulled out a manila folder. The billionaire's pen clattered to the table and $47 billion hung in the balance. Welcome back to Eva's Stories. I have missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. The alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m. in the penthouse suite overlooking Central Park. Jonathan Cross rolled over in his king-sized bed, Egyptian cotton sheets tangled around his lean frame. At 45, his silver hair caught the early morning light streaming through the windows. His blue eyes, sharp as cut glass, focused immediately on the day ahead. Today would change everything. The merger with Pinnacle Industries, $47 billion, would make Cross Dynamics the largest tech conglomerate on the East Coast. He'd worked 15 years for this moment. Jonathan stepped into his marble bathroom, steam already rising from the automated shower. The mirror reflected a man who'd never known failure. His jaw was strong, his shoulders broad beneath the custom-fitted navy suit waiting in his walk-in closet. He'd come from nothing, a trailer park in rural Georgia, but nobody would ever know that now. Mr. Cross. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The car will be ready in 20 minutes. Tell Victoria I want those final contracts reviewed one more time, Jonathan called back, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. No mistakes today. The elevator descended 43 floors to the parking garage where his black Bentley waited. The city blurred past his tinted windows as they headed toward Le Bernardin, the exclusive French restaurant where the signing would take place. Jonathan's fingers drummed against his leather briefcase. Inside were contracts that would reshape his empire. His phone buzzed. Victoria Kane, his business partner and the woman who'd helped build Cross Dynamics from a startup into a billion-dollar corporation. Her text read, "All systems go. Pinnacle's CEO signed off this morning. We're about to be very, very rich." Jonathan smiled. He'd trusted Victoria's instincts for 8 years. She was ruthless, brilliant, and absolutely loyal. Together, they were unstoppable. 27 miles away in Queens, Denise Parker's alarm had been broken for 3 months. She relied on her 10-year-old son Tyler to wake her at 5 a.m. sharp. This morning was no different. "Mama, you got to get up." Tyler shook her shoulder gently. "Big day at the fancy restaurant, remember?" Denise opened her warm brown eyes, immediately alert despite only 4 hours of sleep. She'd worked a double shift yesterday, lunch at Romano's Deli, dinner at Giuseppe's Kitchen. Today meant catering an exclusive business lunch at Le Bernardin, Manhattan's most expensive restaurant. The pay would cover Tyler's school supplies and maybe, finally, the deposit for a better apartment. She pulled her natural curls back with a simple band and studied her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. At 32, exhaustion showed around her eyes, but her spine stayed straight. She'd learned long ago that dignity couldn't be taken, only given away. "You eating breakfast, baby?" she called to Tyler, pulling on her bright emerald uniform dress. The color looked beautiful against her dark skin, though she'd never admit caring about such things. "Cereal's fine, Mama." Tyler appeared in the doorway, backpack already slung over his shoulder. "You think today's gonna be different?" Denise paused, brushing invisible lint from her uniform. Tyler asked this question often, always hoping their circumstances might shift, that his mother's intelligence and hard work might finally pay off. She held an MBA from Columbia, earned on scholarships and student loans before Tyler was born. But life had other plans. "Every day's different, sweetheart. Question is whether we notice." She kissed his forehead and grabbed her purse, a worn leather bag that had seen better years. Inside, tucked between her wallet and Tyler's school emergency forms, was a manila folder she never discussed. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with a 10-year-old who already knew too much about grown-up struggles. The subway ride to Manhattan took 45 minutes. Denise used the time to review the catering schedule Margaret Thornton had given her yesterday. High-profile business lunch. Expensive wine. Important clients. The usual instructions. Be invisible, be perfect, don't make eye contact. She'd mastered the art of invisibility over the past 5 years, moving through expensive restaurants like a ghost in emerald green. Rich people rarely saw service staff as human beings, just functions to be performed. It was safer that way. Safer for everyone. But today felt different. The manila folder seemed heavier in her purse, and the knot in her stomach told her that sometimes being invisible wasn't enough. Le Bernardine's private dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Margaret Thornton supervised the final preparations, her pearl necklace catching the light as she directed the staff with military precision. She'd built this restaurant's reputation on flawless service and absolute discretion. "Denise, you'll handle the wine service," Margaret announced as the catering staff assembled. "The Chateau Margaux 2000. Be careful. One bottle costs more than most people make in 6 months." Denise nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. She'd served expensive wine before, knew the weight of liquid gold in her hands. Her steady fingers had never failed her. The Cross Dynamics team arrived at 11:30 a.m. sharp. Jonathan entered first, his presence commanding the room without effort. Victoria Kane followed, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek twist, her red suit sharp enough to cut glass. Behind them came Bobby Coleman, a nervous junior lawyer clutching his briefcase like a lifeline. Denise watched from the service station, taking note of the dynamics. She'd learned to read people, their tensions, their secrets, their weaknesses. It was a survival skill acquired through necessity. Jonathan's laugh boomed across the room as he greeted the Pinnacle Industries representatives. "Gentlemen, today we make history." But Denise noticed what others missed: the slight tremor in his left hand, the way his eyes darted to Victoria before every major statement. Confidence and anxiety danced together in his gestures. She'd seen it before in executives who'd built empires on foundation they weren't certain would hold. "Wine service begins in 10 minutes, Margaret whispered. "Remember, these people can destroy careers with a single complaint." Denise straightened her shoulders and moved toward the wine station. The Chateau Margaux waited in its expensive silence, ready to celebrate what everyone assumed would be a triumphant afternoon. She had no idea that in less than an hour, she'd be the only person standing between Jonathan Cross and complete financial ruin. Or that the man who was about to humiliate her would soon trust her with everything he'd worked to build. Sometimes the most important moments begin with the smallest gestures: a careful hand reaching for an expensive bottle, a woman choosing dignity over safety, a man about to discover that his greatest strength might come from his most unexpected source. The wine service was about to begin. The dining room hummed with the energy of impending triumph. Jonathan Cross stood at the head of the polished table, surveying his kingdom. Representatives from Pinnacle Industries had arrived precisely at noon, their expensive suits and confident handshakes confirming what he already knew: today belonged to him. "Victoria, brilliant work on the subsidiary clauses," Jonathan said, his voice carrying across the room. "Pinnacle never saw it coming." Victoria Kane smiled, her red lips curving with satisfaction. Sometimes the best deals happen when the other party thinks they're winning. She opened her leather portfolio, revealing thick contracts bound in navy covers. "Everything's exactly as we discussed. Sign these, and Cross Dynamics becomes the undisputed leader in tech acquisitions." Denise moved silently between the tables, checking water glasses and adjusting silverware. Her trained eyes catalogued every detail: Jonathan's relaxed posture, Victoria's predatory confidence, the Pinnacle executive's eager anticipation. But something felt wrong. The manila folder in her purse seemed to pulse with warning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan announced, raising his water glass, "to the future of American technology innovation." The toast echoed around the room. Denise retreated to the service station where Margaret Thornton waited with the wine selection. "The Chateau Margaux goes to Mr. Cross first," Margaret instructed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then clockwise around the table. Standard pour, no flourishes." These people value substance over show. Denise lifted the bottle carefully. The 2000 vintage felt substantial in her hands, its weight representing more money than she'd earned in her entire working life. She'd served expensive wine countless times, but this moment carried different energy. Her palms should have been steady. Instead, they trembled slightly. She approached Jonathan's chair, the bottle angled properly for service. "Your wine, sir." Jonathan didn't acknowledge her presence, continuing his conversation with the Pinnacle CEO about market projections. Denise waited, professional smile fixed in place, as he gestured emphatically about quarterly growth targets. 47 billion doesn't just buy companies, Jonathan was saying. It purchases destiny. His elbow moved suddenly, an expansive gesture about revolutionary technology. The motion caught Denise off guard. Her grip on the bottle shifted slightly, and disaster struck with crystal precision. The wine splashed across the white tablecloth, deep red spreading like spilled blood. Drops hit the contracts, staining the navy covers. More importantly, several drops landed on Jonathan's pristine white shirt and silver tie. Silence crashed over the room. "Jesus Christ!" Jonathan's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. He stood slowly, staring down at his ruined shirt. "Are you kidding me?" Denise set the bottle down immediately, reaching for her service towel. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Let me clean." "Don't." Jonathan's hand shot up, stopping her approach. "Don't touch anything else." His blue eyes blazed with humiliation and rage. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "Sir, it was an accident." "Your elbow." "My elbow." Jonathan's voice rose. "You're blaming me for your incompetence." The room watched in uncomfortable silence. Victoria Kane's lips pressed into a thin line. The Pinnacle executives exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. Jonathan stepped closer to Denise, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "Do you know how much this wine costs? $24,000 a bottle. More than you make in an entire year, I'd bet. Hell, probably more than you've made in your entire worthless career." Denise felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her chest. She'd endured this before, the casual cruelty of people who measured human worth in dollar amounts. But today, something was different. The manila folder's contents flashed through her mind. "Sir, I apologize for the accident," she said quietly, maintaining eye contact despite the cost. "I'll pay for dry cleaning, and the restaurant will certainly replace the wine." Jonathan laughed bitterly. "Replace it? Lady, you couldn't afford to replace the cork." He gestured dismissively. "Just get out of here. Have them send someone competent to clean up your mess." Denise nodded, beginning to turn away. Then she stopped. The contracts lay spread across the table, wine stains visible on several pages. But her eyes caught something else, the subsidiary acquisition list attached to the main document. Pinnacle Industries was selling more than Jonathan realized. Her heart hammered against her ribs as recognition hit her. "Sir." Her voice was barely audible. "What now?" Jonathan snapped, still brushing wine from his shirt. Denise looked at Victoria Kane, then back at Jonathan. "You shouldn't sign those contracts." The room went dead quiet again, but this silence felt different. Dangerous. Jonathan stared at her as if she'd spoken in another language. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "The contracts," Denise repeated, her voice stronger now. "You shouldn't sign them. Not the way they're written." Victoria Kane stood slowly, her predatory smile returning. "Jonathan, perhaps we should have security remove this person. She's clearly had some sort of breakdown." But Jonathan held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Denise's face. "No. I want to hear this." His voice carried a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "You, a waitress who just destroyed a $24,000 bottle of wine, are giving me business advice?" "I'm not giving advice," Denise said carefully. "I'm warning you." "Warning me?" Jonathan's laugh had no humor in it. "About what, exactly?" Denise glanced around the room, acutely aware that every word could destroy her livelihood. But Tyler's face flashed in her mind, along with all the other children who deserved better than a world where people like Victoria Kane operated in shadows. "The subsidiary list," she said quietly. "Pinnacle isn't just selling you their tech companies. They're including their liability holdings. Every lawsuit, every environmental cleanup, every regulatory violation from the past 15 years. It's all buried in Section 12 of the third addendum." The color drained from Jonathan's face. He grabbed the contracts, flipping through pages with increasing urgency. "That's impossible." Victoria reviewed. "I reviewed everything," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "This woman is clearly trying to sabotage our deal for some pathetic reason. Jonathan, don't let her desperate attention-seeking delay what we've worked for." But Jonathan wasn't listening to Victoria anymore. He was staring at Section 12, his eyes scanning the dense legal language. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Jonathan." The Pinnacle CEO leaned forward. "Is there a problem?" Denise watched Jonathan's face as comprehension dawned. The subsidiary holdings included 3 companies currently facing massive environmental lawsuits. Another was under federal investigation for patent theft. Together, the potential liabilities exceeded $8 billion. "How did you?" Jonathan looked up at Denise, his anger replaced by confusion. "How could you possibly know this?" Before Denise could answer, Victoria Kane stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Jonathan, sign the contracts. We have a schedule to maintain." "Wait." Jonathan held up his hand again, his attention focused entirely on Denise. "You seem to know an awful lot about corporate law for a waitress." Denise felt the weight of every eye in the room. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could apologize, retreat to invisibility, let these powerful people handle their own affairs. It would be safer, smarter. Instead, she reached into her purse and withdrew the manila folder. "I know because I worked for Pinnacle Industries," she said quietly. 3 years ago, I was their Director of Acquisitions Compliance. I wrote the reports on those subsidiary companies. I know exactly what they're trying to hide." The folder landed on the table with surprising weight. Inside were photocopied documents, financial reports, and legal memoranda that painted a clear picture of Pinnacle's deception. Jonathan opened the folder with trembling hands. "You worked for Pinnacle?" "Until I discovered they were systematically hiding environmental liabilities from potential buyers," Denise confirmed. "I reported it to the SEC. Pinnacle buried the investigation and destroyed my career. I've been working restaurant jobs ever since, waiting for a chance to make this right." Victoria's face had gone pale. "Jonathan, this is clearly some sort of elaborate setup. She probably followed us here." "No," Jonathan said slowly, studying the documents. "These reports are legitimate. The dates, the legal language, the subsidiary numbers, it all matches." He looked up at Denise with something approaching awe. "You've been carrying this around for 3 years?" "Someone needed to know the truth," Denise said simply. "I just never imagined it would be you." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman Jonathan had just humiliated, whose annual salary he'd mocked, had potentially saved him from the biggest financial disaster of his career. The person he'd dismissed as worthless had just proven herself more valuable than his highest-paid advisors. Jonathan set the contracts aside, his hand steady now despite the magnitude of what had almost happened. "Bobby," he called to his lawyer, "cancel the signing. We need a complete audit of these subsidiary holdings." The Pinnacle executives began protesting, but Jonathan wasn't listening. He was staring at Denise with the expression of a man whose entire worldview had just shifted on its axis. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Denise Parker." "Denise Parker." Jonathan repeated it slowly, as if testing the weight of words that should have been spoken with respect from the beginning. "I owe you more than an apology." But before Denise could respond, Victoria Kane spoke up, her voice sharp with something that sounded almost like panic. "Jonathan, you're making a terrible mistake. Don't let this woman manipulate you with forged documents and sob stories." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Denise felt the familiar sting of being called a liar, a manipulator, someone whose word meant nothing because of who she was and how she looked. But this time, she wasn't alone in the fight. Jonathan Cross looked at Victoria Kane with eyes that had seen too much truth to accept comfortable lies anymore. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk." The private conference room at Le Bernardin felt smaller now, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. Jonathan Cross sat across from Victoria Kane, the contracts scattered between them like evidence at a crime scene. The Pinnacle executives had departed 20 minutes ago, their faces dark with frustration at the collapsed deal. 8 years, Victoria. Jonathan's voice was quiet, controlled. 8 years we've built this company together. Tell me you didn't know about those subsidiary liabilities. Victoria's red suit looked sharp as ever, but something had shifted in her posture. Her usual predatory confidence had been replaced by careful calculation. Jonathan, you're letting one woman's documents destroy everything we've worked for. How do you know she didn't forge those reports? Because I spent the last hour on the phone with my forensic accounting team. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, studying the woman who'd been his most trusted partner. The reports are legitimate. Every single document she provided checks out. Pinnacle was trying to dump $8 billion in liabilities on us. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. So we dodged a bullet. We should be thanking our lucky stars, not questioning my judgment. Your judgment. Jonathan's eyebrows rose. Victoria, you personally reviewed those contracts. You assured me there were no hidden liabilities. Either you're incompetent, which I know you're not, or what? Victoria's voice carried a sharp edge now. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. Bank records filled the display, showing a series of wire transfers from offshore accounts. My security team found these transactions this morning. 3 payments of $2 million each, deposited into accounts tied to your personal holding company. All from Pinnacle subsidiaries. The color drained from Victoria's face, but her expression remained defiant. Those are consulting fees for preliminary merger work. Perfectly legal. Consulting fees paid before we even announced our interest in acquiring Pinnacle? Jonathan's voice hardened. Consulting fees that coincidentally matched the exact amount Pinnacle would have saved by not disclosing their liability issues? Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I don't have to listen to these paranoid accusations. You're choosing to believe some desperate waitress over your own business partner. Her name is Denise Parker, Jonathan said quietly. And she just saved me from the biggest mistake of my career. Something my most trusted advisor was apparently trying to help me make. The words hung between them like a blade. Victoria's mask finally slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath her professional exterior. You want to know the truth? Victoria's laugh held no warmth. Fine. Yes, Pinnacle approached me 6 months ago. They offered me a partnership in their new venture if I could facilitate this merger without full disclosure. But it wasn't about the money, Jonathan. It was about proving I could build. Jonathan felt something break inside his chest. My shadow. Victoria, we were partners. Equals. Equals. Victoria's voice rose. I did the work while you took the credit. I negotiated the deals while you played the charming CEO for the media. I built this company's reputation while everyone called it Jonathan Cross's empire. When was the last time anyone mentioned Victoria Kane in a business article about Cross Dynamics? The truth of her words stung because they carried weight. Jonathan had indeed become the public face of their company, the billionaire CEO who graced magazine covers and spoke at conferences. Victoria had always preferred working behind the scenes, but he'd never considered that she might resent the arrangement. You could have talked to me, Jonathan said. If you felt undervalued, underappreciated. Talk to you. Victoria gathered her belongings, her movements sharp and decisive. Like you talked to that waitress before humiliating her? Like you talked to any of the people you consider beneath your notice? You don't see people, Jonathan. You see functions. I was your function for 8 years, and the moment someone more useful appeared, you discarded me. Jonathan stood as well, his mind reeling. That's not. I didn't discard you. I'm trying to understand why you'd betray everything we built. Betray. Victoria paused at the door, her hand on the handle. I was trying to secure my future because I finally realized you'd never willingly share yours. The Pinnacle deal would have made us both richer than we ever imagined. The liabilities would have been manageable with proper legal strategy. $8 billion in environmental cleanup and patent lawsuits is not manageable, Victoria. It would have destroyed us. Victoria shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe we would have found a way to make it work. We'll never know now, thanks to your new advisor. She left without another word, the door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Jonathan stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of his professional relationship and the documents that had saved his financial life. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. Victoria Kane cleared out her office. Security footage shows her removing several boxes of files. Should we pursue? Jonathan stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Let her go. Change all access codes and passwords immediately. Meanwhile, 20 floors below in the restaurant's staff break room, Denise Parker sat on a plastic chair, staring at her hands. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving her exhausted and uncertain about what would happen next. Margaret Thornton appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Denise. Mr. Cross is asking to speak with you. Denise's stomach clenched. Am I fired? Honestly? I have no idea what's happening upstairs. Margaret's voice was gentler than usual, but he specifically requested that you join him in the conference room. Alone. The elevator ride to the private dining floor felt eternal. Denise's reflection in the polished metal doors showed a woman who looked older than her 32 years, worn down by 3 years of restaurant work and the constant weight of carrying dangerous knowledge. The conference room door stood open. Jonathan Cross sat at the far end of the table, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive tie loosened. He looked up when she entered, and she was surprised to see something vulnerable in his sharp blue eyes. Please, sit down. Jonathan gestured to a chair across from him. I owe you more than an apology. Denise remained standing. If this is about the wine, I already said I'd pay for it. It's not about the wine. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. It's about everything else. The way I spoke to you, the assumptions I made, He paused, searching for words. The casual cruelty. There's no excuse for it. People like you don't usually apologize to people like me. Jonathan flinched at the truth in her statement. What kind of person am I, exactly? Denise studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or false contrition. Instead, she saw genuine confusion, as if he was discovering uncomfortable truths about himself. You're someone who measures human worth by bank account balances, she said quietly. Someone who thinks service workers are invisible until they spill wine on your shirt. Someone who built an empire but forgot the cost. And what's the cost? Your humanity. Denise's voice was steady, matter of fact. You can't treat people like disposable objects for years without losing pieces of your soul. I've seen it happen to executives before. The money becomes everything, and everything else becomes nothing. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Victoria said something similar. She said I don't see people, just functions. She's not wrong. Denise finally sat down, her emerald uniform bright against the dark leather chair. But she's also not blameless. Taking bribes to hide corporate fraud isn't fighting for recognition. It's just greed with better justification. You heard our conversation? Sound travels in buildings like this. Denise folded her hands in her lap. She was using you, Mr. Cross. But you were using her too. The question is what you do now that you know. Jonathan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. What would you do? The question surprised her. Me. You. The woman who carried evidence of corporate fraud for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to act. The woman who risked her job to warn a stranger about financial disaster. What would you do if you were me? Denise was quiet for a moment, thinking about Tyler waiting for her at home, about the bills piling up on their kitchen table, about the years she'd spent serving people who looked through her like she was invisible. I'd remember that every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about, she said finally. I'd remember that dignity isn't something you earn with money. It's something you're born with, and something you can choose to respect in others or destroy with your words. Jonathan nodded slowly. And professionally. About the company. Professionally. Denise's lips curved in a slight smile. I'd hire better advisors. People who care more about your success than their own. People who understand that real power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. People like you. The question hung in the air between them. Denise stared at Jonathan, trying to read his expression. Was this an offer? A test? Another moment where hope might be dangled just long enough to be snatched away? Mr. Cross, I'm a waitress with a 5-year gap in my corporate resume and a son who needs stability. I'm not exactly executive material anymore. But you used to be. And you still think like one. Jonathan pulled out his phone. I just spent an hour reviewing your background. MBA from Columbia, summa cum laude. 3 years as Director of Acquisitions Compliance at Pinnacle Industries. Whistleblower status with the SEC. Exemplary performance reviews until the day you were terminated for budget restructuring. Denise felt her chest tighten. They destroyed my references. No legitimate company would hire me. I would. The words were simple, direct, and completely unexpected. Denise stared at Jonathan, searching for the catch, the condition, the inevitable disappointment that had followed every other moment of hope in her adult life. Why? She asked quietly. Because you saved me $8 billion today. Because you told me the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Because. Jonathan paused, his voice becoming softer. Because I need someone who sees me as a person, not just a bank account. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm making a mistake. Denise felt tears threaten behind her eyes. What kind of position? Chief Compliance Officer. Full benefits, signing bonus to help with your transition, and a salary that reflects your actual worth. Jonathan named a figure that made Denise's breath catch. It was more than she'd made at her peak with Pinnacle Industries. Denise struggled for words. I need to think about it. Jonathan nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. He stood and extended his hand. But Denise? Thank you. For everything. She shook his hand, surprised by the warmth in his grip. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Possibility. Neither of them realized that their handshake was being photographed through the conference room windows by a private investigator Victoria Kane had hired weeks earlier. Neither knew that Victoria's revenge was just beginning, or that their growing connection would soon be tested in ways that would threaten everything they both held dear. But in that moment, as afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows and illuminated two people discovering unexpected respect for each other, the future felt full of promise. 3 days after the restaurant confrontation, Denise Parker stood in the lobby of the federal building in Lower Manhattan, clutching a subpoena that had arrived at her Queens apartment that morning. The marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the sound of her sensible flats echoed as she approached the security checkpoint. Denise Parker, here for the Cross Dynamics investigation, she told the guard, her voice steadier than she felt. Detective Frank Morrison waited for her on the 15th floor, his weathered face showing the exhaustion of a man who'd spent too many years chasing corporate criminals. His gray suit had seen better days, and his tie bore a small coffee stain that spoke to hurried mornings and long nights. Ms. Parker, thank you for coming in. Detective Morrison gestured to a conference room where Jonathan Cross already sat, looking uncomfortable in a navy suit that somehow seemed less commanding in the sterile government building. Jonathan looked up when she entered, and their eyes met across the table. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared circumstance. Neither had expected to see the other again so soon, and certainly not under these conditions. Please have a seat, Detective Morrison said, settling into his chair with a stack of files. As I explained over the phone, We're investigating potential securities fraud related to the Pinnacle Industries merger attempt. Both of your statements are crucial to our case." Denise sat across from Jonathan, acutely aware of the distance between them and the federal agents positioned around the room. This wasn't the elegant restaurant where she'd served wine and he'd wielded power. Here, they were both simply witnesses to potential crimes. "Let's start with you, Ms. Parker," Detective Morrison continued. "You worked for Pinnacle Industries from 2019 to 2021. During that time, you discovered systematic concealment of environmental liabilities. Walk me through what you found." For the next hour, Denise detailed her discoveries at Pinnacle Industries. She explained how subsidiary companies were used to hide toxic waste cleanup costs, how patent lawsuits were buried in shell corporations, how regulatory violations were systematically concealed from potential merger partners. Jonathan listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed his sharp business acumen. Denise found herself appreciating his intelligence, the way he grasped complex financial structures without lengthy explanations. "Mr. Cross," Detective Morrison turned his attention to Jonathan. "You nearly signed contracts that would have transferred $8 billion in hidden liabilities to your company. Ms. Parker's intervention saved you from what would have been catastrophic financial exposure. But we need to understand Victoria Kane's role in this arrangement." Jonathan's jaw tightened at Victoria's name. "Victoria reviewed those contracts personally. She assured me there were no hidden liabilities. I trusted her judgment completely. And now you believe she was compromised?" "I know she was compromised." Jonathan pulled out his phone, showing Detective Morrison bank records his forensic accountants had uncovered. $6 million in payments from Pinnacle subsidiaries over the past 8 months, all routed through offshore accounts tied to Victoria's personal holdings. Detective Morrison studied the records carefully. This suggests coordination between Ms. Kane and Pinnacle Industries to facilitate a fraudulent merger. Did Ms. Kane have access to the due diligence materials? "She controlled the entire review process," Jonathan confirmed. "I relied on her completely." "Which brings us to our problem," Detective Morrison said, leaning back in his chair. "Victoria Kane has disappeared. Her apartment is empty, her phone disconnected, her passport flagged but unused. She's gone to ground, and with her went crucial evidence we need to build our case against Pinnacle Industries." Denise felt a chill run through her. What kind of evidence? The original contracts she reviewed, her correspondence with Pinnacle executives, financial records that could prove deliberate concealment rather than mere oversight. Detective Morrison spread photos across the table showing Victoria's empty office, cleaned-out filing cabinets, blank computer hard drives. She was thorough. Jonathan stared at the photos, his face pale. "She took everything." "Not everything," Detective Morrison said. "We have Ms. Parker's documents, which prove the liabilities existed and were systematically hidden. We have your bank records showing the attempted fraud. But we need more to make charges stick against the broader conspiracy." "What are you asking us to do?" Denise asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We need you to work together," Detective Morrison said simply. "Ms. Parker, your knowledge of Pinnacle's internal structure is invaluable. Mr. Cross, your business connections and resources could help us trace the money trail. Both of you have reasons to want Victoria Kane brought to justice." Jonathan and Denise exchanged glances across the table. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. 3 days ago, he'd humiliated her over spilled wine. Now they were being asked to collaborate in bringing down the woman who'd betrayed them both. "How long would this take?" Denise asked. "Weeks, possibly months," Detective Morrison admitted. "White-collar investigations move slowly. We need to build an airtight case that can survive the kind of legal challenges Pinnacle's lawyers will mount." "And in the meantime?" Jonathan asked. "In the meantime, you'll be working closely together, reviewing financial records, reconstructing the timeline of the conspiracy, potentially traveling to interview witnesses." Detective Morrison closed his files. "I understand this is an unusual request, but you're the only people who have both the expertise and the motivation to help us succeed." After Detective Morrison left to consult with his supervisors, Jonathan and Denise found themselves alone in the conference room. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and uncertain possibilities. "I never answered your job offer," Denise said quietly. Jonathan looked up from his phone, where he'd been reviewing messages from his remaining staff. "Given the circumstances, I assumed." "I want to accept," Denise interrupted. "But not like this. Not because we're forced to work together by federal investigators." "Then why?" Denise was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because 3 days ago, you showed me who you really are. The cruel, dismissive man who values people by their bank accounts. But then you also showed me who you could become. The man who apologized without making excuses, who offered opportunity without conditions." Jonathan set his phone aside, giving her his complete attention. "And which man do you think I am?" "I think you're both," Denise said honestly. "The question is which one you choose to be going forward." "What about you?" Jonathan asked. 3 days ago, you were a waitress carrying around evidence of corporate fraud. Today you're a federal witness working with billionaire CEOs. Which person are you? Denise smiled slightly. "I'm someone who's tired of being invisible. Someone who wants to use her brain for more than memorizing wine pairings and table numbers. Someone who believes that doing the right thing sometimes means taking risks. Even if those risks include working with someone who treated you terribly?" "Especially then," Denise said. "Because holding grudges is exhausting, and life's too short to waste on people who refuse to grow." Jonathan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that this woman possessed wisdom he'd spent decades overlooking. "If we do this together, work on the investigation, I want you to know that my job offer stands regardless of the outcome. Whatever happens with Victoria and Pinnacle Industries, Cross Dynamics needs someone like you." "Someone like me?" "Someone who tells the truth even when it's dangerous. Someone who sees corruption and refuses to stay silent. Someone who—" Jonathan paused, searching for words. "Someone who makes me want to be better than I am." Before Denise could respond, Detective Morrison returned with FBI agent Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who carried herself with quiet authority. "We've been authorized to move forward," Agent Chen announced. "Ms. Parker, we'll need you to review Pinnacle's internal communications from your time there. Mr. Cross, we'll need access to all financial records related to the merger attempt. This will require both of you to work out of our secure facility downtown." "Together?" Denise asked. "Together," Agent Chen confirmed. "This investigation will succeed or fail based on your ability to collaborate effectively. We understand the unusual nature of your partnership, but frankly, it's our best hope of building a case that can take down this entire network." Jonathan looked at Denise, seeing in her face the same mixture of uncertainty and determination he felt. "What do you think?" Denise thought about Tyler waiting for her at home, about the restaurant shifts she'd have to abandon, about the risks of getting deeper involved in a federal investigation. Then she thought about all the other victims of corporate fraud, all the people whose retirement savings disappeared into offshore accounts while executives lived in luxury. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the most important work requires the most unlikely partnerships." "Then it's settled," Agent Chen said. "You'll start Monday morning. Fair warning, the next few weeks will test everything you think you know about each other and about yourselves. Corporate fraud investigations have a way of revealing character under pressure." As they prepared to leave the federal building, Jonathan touched Denise's arm gently. "Can I give you a ride home? It's the least I can do." Denise hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." The black Bentley felt different with Denise as a passenger rather than a stranger serving wine. Jonathan found himself noticing details he'd missed before. The way she observed everything around her, the quiet intelligence in her questions about the investigation, the absence of bitterness despite everything she'd endured. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said as they crossed the bridge into Queens. "Sure. Why didn't you hate me? After the way I treated you at the restaurant, you had every reason to walk away and let me sign those contracts. Why warn me?" Denise was quiet for so long that Jonathan wondered if she'd answer. Finally, she spoke. "Because Tyler is watching," she said simply. "My son. He's 10 years old, and he sees how people treat his mother. If I let cruelty turn me cruel, what am I teaching him about the world? If I let your prejudice make me bitter, then you win twice. Once when you hurt me, and again when I let that hurt change who I am. Jonathan felt something break open in his chest, a recognition of grace he'd never encountered in boardrooms or business deals. Your son is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him, Denise corrected. He reminds me every day that the world can be better than it is. We just have to choose to make it that way. As the Bentley pulled up to Denise's apartment building, Jonathan realized that the next few weeks would change them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. They were no longer the billionaire CEO and the waitress from that disastrous lunch. They were partners now, bound together by circumstances and united by a shared purpose. Neither knew that Victoria Kane was watching from a rented car across the street, photographing their goodbye handshake and planning her next move in a game that had become deeply personal. Neither realized that their collaboration would soon be tested by threats they couldn't anticipate. But in that moment, as evening shadows fell across Queens and two unlikely allies prepared to fight corporate corruption together, the future felt full of possibilities neither had dared to imagine just days before. 2 weeks into the federal investigation, Denise Parker sat in the secure conference room on the 14th floor of the FBI field office, surrounded by bankers' boxes filled with financial records. The afternoon sun streamed through reinforced windows, casting long shadows across spreadsheets that told the story of corporate greed spanning multiple continents. Jonathan Cross occupied the chair across from her, his sleeves rolled up, his silver hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. Over the past 14 days, she'd watched him transform from the arrogant billionaire she'd first met into someone more human, more vulnerable. The expensive suits remained, but the armor they represented had begun to crack. This doesn't make sense, Jonathan muttered, studying a series of wire transfers from 2020. Victoria received payments from Pinnacle subsidiaries starting 8 months ago, but these transactions show contact between them dating back 3 years. Denise looked up from the employment records she'd been reviewing. 3 years ago was when I first reported the environmental liabilities to Pinnacle's board. Maybe Victoria's involvement goes back further than we thought. Agent Sarah Chen entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd made an uncomfortable discovery. I need to show you both something. It might be difficult to hear. She activated the wall-mounted display, revealing a series of photographs. The first showed Victoria Kane and a man Denise didn't recognize shaking hands outside a restaurant in Midtown. This was taken 18 months ago, Agent Chen explained. The man with Victoria is Thomas Brennan, Pinnacle Industries' former director of regulatory compliance. Jonathan frowned. I've never heard that name. You wouldn't have, Denise said quietly, her face going pale. Thomas Brennan was my supervisor at Pinnacle Industries. He's the one who fired me for reporting the liability issues. The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Jonathan set down his coffee cup carefully, his eyes moving between the photograph and Denise's stricken expression. Agent Chen, Jonathan's voice was controlled but tense. What are you suggesting? We're not suggesting anything yet. We're following the evidence. Agent Chen clicked to the next slide, showing bank records. Thomas Brennan received $2 million from Victoria Kane's holding company 6 months after Ms. Parker was terminated from Pinnacle Industries. Denise felt the blood drain from her face. He sold my research. Thomas sold my compliance reports to Victoria. It appears that way, Agent Chen confirmed gently. We believe Victoria Kane has been planning this merger manipulation for over 2 years. She used your termination as an opportunity to acquire inside information about Pinnacle's vulnerabilities. Jonathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Victoria knew about Denise before the restaurant. She knew about the environmental liabilities, knew about the whistleblower reports, knew everything. Which means, Denise said slowly, the implication sinking in, she orchestrated the entire merger attempt knowing it would fail. But why? Agent Chen clicked to another slide showing complex financial structures. We believe the plan was more sophisticated than simple bribery. Victoria Kane wasn't trying to hide the liabilities from you, Mr. Cross. She was planning to expose them after you'd signed the contracts. Jonathan's face went white. A controlled demolition. She wanted cross dynamics to fail. The financial models we've reconstructed suggest that Victoria Kane and her partners stood to make over $15 billion by short-selling cross dynamics stock immediately before revealing the hidden liabilities, Agent Chen explained. The merger would have destroyed your company, but it would have made her the richest woman in America. The room fell silent as the full scope of Victoria's betrayal became clear. This wasn't just corporate fraud. It was a calculated attempt to destroy everything Jonathan had built while making herself wealthy beyond imagination. There's more, Agent Chen said quietly. We found this in Thomas Brennan's files. The next slide showed Denise's original employment application at Pinnacle Industries, but it had been annotated with handwritten notes. Someone had circled her address in Queens, her son's school, her previous employment history. Personal information that had nothing to do with compliance work. They were watching me, Denise whispered. Even after they fired me, they were keeping track of where I worked, where I lived. Jonathan moved to stand beside her chair, his presence protective rather than threatening. Why? If they already had your reports, why continue surveillance? Because I was the only person who could expose their plan, Denise said, the pieces falling into place. If I ever surfaced at the wrong moment, if I ever tried to warn someone about Pinnacle's hidden liabilities, I could destroy their entire scheme. Agent Chen nodded grimly. We believe Victoria Kane was monitoring your employment specifically to ensure you wouldn't interfere with their plans. When you took the catering job at Le Bernardin, they must have panicked. But I didn't know about the merger, Denise protested. I was just serving wine. You didn't need to know about the merger, Jonathan said, understanding dawning in his voice. You knew about the liabilities. That was enough to ruin everything they'd planned. Agent Chen clicked to the final slide, showing a series of text messages between Victoria Kane and Thomas Brennan. The timestamp showed they were sent on the morning of the restaurant meeting. Brennan, Parker is working the lunch service today. She'll see the contracts. Kane, handle it. Make sure she stays quiet. Brennan, how? Kane, I don't care. Use her kid if necessary. Denise felt the world tilt around her. Tyler. They were going to threaten Tyler. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Over my dead body. Mr. Cross. Agent Chen's voice was gentle but firm. We need to discuss security arrangements for both of you. Victoria Kane is still at large, and she now knows you're cooperating with our investigation. The photographs we showed you earlier, of you and Ms. Parker leaving the federal building together, were taken by a private investigator working for her. She's been watching us, Denise said, her voice hollow. Since day one, Agent Chen confirmed. We've identified at least 4 different surveillance teams. Professional-grade equipment, military-trained personnel. Victoria Kane has resources we're still trying to trace. Jonathan sat back down, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. What kind of security arrangements? Safe house for Ms. Parker and her son. Personal protection for both of you. Electronic surveillance of all your communications. Agent Chen's expression was serious. This investigation has moved beyond white-collar crime. Victoria Kane has demonstrated willingness to target civilians, including children. We have to assume she's dangerous. Denise felt tears threaten behind her eyes. I can't uproot Tyler from his school, his friends, his entire life because I got involved in this investigation. You didn't get involved, Jonathan said firmly. You were targeted specifically because of your integrity. Because you refused to stay silent about corporate fraud 3 years ago. He's right, Agent Chen added. Ms. Parker, you've been a victim of this conspiracy from the beginning. The job termination, the destroyed references, the years of restaurant work while holding an MBA, it was all part of Victoria Kane's plan to neutralize you as a threat. The weight of revelation settled over Denise like a physical burden. 3 years of struggle, of working double shifts and hiding her education, of watching Tyler wear second-hand clothes while she served wine to people who spent more on lunch than she made in a month. It hadn't been bad luck or economic hardship. It had been deliberate, systematic destruction of her career and future. I'm going to destroy her, Denise said quietly, her voice carrying a steel Jonathan had never heard before. We're going to destroy her, Jonathan corrected. Together. With the full weight of federal law enforcement behind us. Agent Chen gathered her materials. I'll give you both some time to process this information. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning to discuss next steps. In the meantime, please don't leave the building without security escort. After Agent Chen left, Jonathan and Denise sat in silence, the weight of Victoria's betrayal settling between them like a physical presence. The afternoon light had faded, leaving the conference room illuminated by harsh fluorescent bulbs that cast everything in stark, unforgiving clarity. I'm sorry, Jonathan said finally. For what? For not seeing it sooner. For trusting Victoria over my own instincts. For being the kind of person who made her think she could use people like disposable objects. Jonathan's voice carried a weariness Denise had never heard before. If I'd been a better partner, a better person, maybe she never would have felt justified in planning something like this. Denise studied his face, seeing genuine remorse and self-reflection. Victoria Kane's choices are her own responsibility. You didn't make her steal money or threaten children or destroy people's careers. That was all her. But I created the environment where someone like her could thrive, Jonathan insisted. The ruthless corporate culture, the emphasis on profits over people, the casual dismissal of anyone who wasn't useful to our bottom line. I built a company that rewarded sociopaths. Then build a different kind of company, Denise said simply. When this is over, when Victoria Kane is in prison and Pinnacle Industries is shut down, use what you've learned to create something better. Jonathan looked at her across the table, this remarkable woman who'd maintained her integrity through 3 years of deliberate persecution, who'd risked everything to save him from financial ruin, who somehow found the strength to offer hope instead of hatred. I want you to help me, he said. Not just with the investigation, but with rebuilding Cross Dynamics into something worth being proud of. Something that honors the dignity of every person who works there. Before Denise could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was blocked, but the message was clear. Stop cooperating with the investigation, or Tyler learns what happens to children whose mothers don't know when to stay quiet. The phone slipped from Denise's trembling hands, clattering onto the conference table. Jonathan read the message over her shoulder, his face hardening with protective fury. She's escalating, he said, already reaching for the phone to call Agent Chen. Victoria's running out of options, so she's getting desperate. Denise stared at the threatening words on the screen, feeling something cold and determined crystallize in her chest. Tyler was everything to her, but hiding from bullies had never protected anyone. Sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to fight back harder than they expected. Good, she said quietly, surprising Jonathan with the steel in her voice. Desperate people make mistakes. And when Victoria Kane makes her next mistake, we'll be ready. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from the deepest love. The safe house in Westchester County looked like any other suburban home from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawn, basketball hoop in the driveway. Inside, federal agents monitored multiple screens showing camera feeds from every angle, while Tyler Parker sat at the kitchen table working on his math homework, seemingly oblivious to the danger that had appended his young life. Mom, can you help me with this problem? Tyler called out, his pencil tapping against the worksheet. I don't understand long division. Denise looked up from the laptop where she'd been reviewing more Pinnacle Industries documents. After the threatening text message 3 days ago, Agent Chen had insisted on immediate relocation for her and Tyler. The transition had been jarring, but Tyler was adapting with the resilience that 10-year-old boys seem to possess naturally. Sure, baby. Let me see. Denise moved to sit beside her son, grateful for the normalcy of helping with homework amid the chaos of their current situation. Jonathan Cross sat in the living room, ostensibly working on his own laptop, but actually watching the interaction between mother and son. Over the past week of forced cohabitation, he'd witnessed something he'd never experienced firsthand. Unconditional love expressed through daily acts of care and attention. Mr. Cross. Tyler had taken to addressing Jonathan formally, despite multiple invitations to use his first name. Do you know long division? Jonathan set aside his laptop and joined them at the kitchen table. I do. Would you like me to show you a trick that might make it easier? For the next 30 minutes, Jonathan found himself teaching math to a bright 10-year-old who asked thoughtful questions and genuinely wanted to understand the concepts rather than just get the right answers. Tyler's natural curiosity reminded Jonathan of himself at that age, before circumstances had hardened him into the ruthless businessman he'd become. "You're really good at explaining things," Tyler said when they finished the worksheet. "Do you have kids?" The innocent question hit Jonathan harder than expected. "No, I don't. I never. I was always too focused on work to think about a family." "That's sad," Tyler said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Work is important, but family is more important." "Right, Mom." Denise smiled, her heart swelling with pride at her son's wisdom. "Right, baby. Family is always the most important thing." Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition of what he'd sacrificed in pursuit of wealth and power. Watching Tyler and Denise together over the past week had shown him a different definition of success, one measured in laughter over breakfast and bedtime stories and the kind of trust that came from consistent, loving presence. That evening, after Tyler had gone to bed, Denise and Jonathan found themselves alone in the living room for the first time since arriving at the safe house. The federal agents maintained their posts outside, giving them privacy while ensuring their security. "He's an amazing kid," Jonathan said, settling onto the couch across from Denise. "You've raised him beautifully." "I've tried." Denise curled her legs under her, looking more relaxed than Jonathan had ever seen her. Away from the restaurant uniforms and the stress of financial struggle, she seemed younger, more at peace with herself. "Some days I worry I'm not enough. Single mother, working multiple jobs, never enough money for the things other kids take for granted." "Are you kidding?" Jonathan's voice carried genuine amazement. "Denise, Tyler is confident, kind, intelligent, and completely secure in your love. I've met billionaire families where the children are emotional wrecks because their parents were too busy accumulating wealth to actually parent. You've given him something money can't buy." Denise felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected validation. "Thank you. That means more than you know." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the past weeks settling between them. The investigation had stripped away the social barriers that had initially divided them, revealing two people who'd been shaped by loss and betrayal but had chosen different responses to their pain. "Can I ask you something personal?" Denise said quietly. "Of course. What was your childhood like? Before the money, before cross dynamics. Who were you before you became someone who could casually dismiss people as worthless?" Jonathan was quiet for so long that Denise wondered if she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard before. "I grew up in a trailer park outside Atlanta. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families, and my father drank away whatever money she managed to earn." Jonathan's hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I was ashamed. Ashamed of where we lived, ashamed of my parents, ashamed of wearing second-hand clothes to school while other kids had everything new." Denise listened without judgment, recognizing the pain of childhood poverty in his words. "When I was Tyler's age, my mother took me with her to clean houses sometimes during school breaks. I'd see these massive homes, these families who never worried about electricity being shut off or whether there would be food for dinner." Jonathan's voice grew softer. "I swore I'd never be poor again. Never be invisible. Never be dismissed as unworthy by people who had more money than they knew what to do with." "So you became one of them," Denise said gently, without accusation. "I became worse than them," Jonathan admitted. "At least they were born into their privilege. I earned mine through pure ruthlessness, and somewhere along the way, I forgot where I came from. I forgot what it felt like to be looked through like I didn't exist." "Is that why you treated me so badly at the restaurant? Because I reminded you of who you used to be?" Jonathan met her eyes, seeing understanding rather than anger in her expression. "I think so. Seeing you in that uniform, serving people who didn't even acknowledge your humanity, it terrified me, because I realized I'd become exactly the kind of person I used to hate." Denise leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to stay that person, Jonathan. People can change. You've already started changing." "Have I?" The man who humiliated me 3 weeks ago wouldn't be sitting here teaching my son math problems. He wouldn't care whether Tyler felt secure or loved. He wouldn't ask about my childhood or apologize without making excuses. Denise smiled softly. The man who treated me like I was invisible is disappearing, and someone better is taking his place. Jonathan felt something warm unfold in his chest, a sensation he'd almost forgotten existed. You see good in me that I'm not sure is really there. It's there, Denise said with certainty. I've been watching you with Tyler, with the FBI agents, even with the housekeeping staff here. You say, please, and thank you. You remember people's names. You ask about their families. That's not something you can fake. Maybe I'm just trying to impress you, Jonathan said, attempting lightness but revealing more truth than intended. Denise felt her heart skip slightly. Why would you want to impress me? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither had dared to acknowledge. Jonathan looked at this remarkable woman who'd maintained her integrity through years of deliberate persecution, who'd risked everything to save him from financial ruin, who somehow found the strength to offer grace instead of vengeance. Because, Jonathan said quietly, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because you raised an incredible son while fighting battles I can't even imagine. Because you chose to warn me about those contracts even after I'd treated you cruelly. Because. He paused, searching for courage. Because I'm falling in love with you. The words settled into the quiet room like a prayer. Denise felt her breath catch, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd felt the growing connection between them over the past weeks, the way their partnership had evolved from necessity to genuine care, but hearing him voice it aloud made everything suddenly, beautifully real. Jonathan, she whispered. I know it's complicated, he continued quickly. I know we're from different worlds, that I'm the billionaire CEO who humiliated you and you're the single mother trying to protect her son from my mess. I know the investigation, the safe house, everything about this situation is insane. But I also know that 3 weeks ago, you changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. Denise felt tears slide down her cheeks. You changed mine too. How? You reminded me that I'm worth more than I'd been settling for. That my intelligence and experience have value beyond serving wine and taking orders. That maybe, just maybe, I deserve someone who sees me as more than a function to be performed. Jonathan moved to sit beside her on the couch, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. You deserve everything good in this world, Denise Parker. You deserve respect and love and a partner who celebrates your strength instead of being threatened by it. Is that what you want to be? She asked softly. My partner. In every way you'll let me, Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Denise reached up and touched his face gently, feeling the slight roughness of 5 o'clock shadow beneath her palm. I'm scared. Of me. Of this. Of trusting someone with my heart when Tyler's well-being depends on my good judgment. Of believing that someone like you could really love someone like me. Someone like you, Jonathan said, covering her hand with his, is exactly who I want to love. Someone brave and kind and fiercely protective of the people she cares about. Someone who makes me want to be worthy of her faith in my better nature. Before Denise could respond, Jonathan leaned forward and kissed her gently. It was a kiss full of tenderness and promise, free from the desperation or conquest that might have characterized his past relationships. This was a kiss that spoke of future possibilities and present gratitude, of two people finding unexpected love in the middle of chaos. When they broke apart, Denise rested her forehead against his. What happens when this investigation is over? When we're not thrown together by circumstances beyond our control? Then we choose each other anyway, Jonathan said simply. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Because what we've found together is worth fighting for. Outside, Agent Chen made her rounds, checking security protocols and monitoring communications. Inside the safe house, two people who'd met as adversaries had discovered something neither had expected. Love that transcended class barriers and past wounds, love that promised healing and hope for the future. Neither knew that Victoria Kane was less than a mile away, watching the safe house through high-powered binoculars and planning her most desperate move yet. Neither realized that their growing love had made them more vulnerable, not less, to someone who understood that the deepest wounds came from attacking what people treasured most. But in that moment, surrounded by federal protection and wrapped in each other's arms, Jonathan and Denise allowed themselves to believe that love might be enough to overcome even the darkest threats. The hardest test was still ahead, but they would face it together. Sometimes the most powerful connections form when we're at our most vulnerable. The morning started like every other morning in the safe house. Tyler ate his cereal while working on vocabulary words, Denise reviewed financial documents at her laptop, and Jonathan read news reports about the ongoing federal investigation into Pinnacle Industries. Agent Chen's team maintained their posts around the property, and the illusion of security felt almost comfortable after 10 days of routine. None of them noticed the utility van parked 3 blocks away, or the maintenance worker in coveralls who'd been slowly approaching the house's electrical meter for the past hour. "Mom, what does unprecedented mean?" Tyler asked, pointing to a word in his reading workbook. "It means something that's never happened before," Denise explained, moving to sit beside him at the kitchen table. "Something completely new or unusual." "Like you and Mr. Cross falling in love?" Tyler asked with the direct innocence that made adults uncomfortable. Jonathan looked up from his newspaper, color rising in his cheeks. Over the past week, he and Denise had tried to be discreet about their growing relationship, but 10-year-olds were remarkably observant. "Tyler," Denise said gently, "what makes you think?" "You hold hands when you think I'm not looking," Tyler said matter-of-factly. "And Mr. Cross smiles different now. Like he's happy in a way he wasn't before." Jonathan set down his coffee cup, studying the boy who'd become so important to him in such a short time. "Would that bother you, Tyler? If your mom and I cared about each other?" Tyler considered the question seriously. "Are you going to be nice to her? Always. Are you going to help take care of us?" "If your mother will let me." Tyler nodded approvingly. "Then I think it's good. Mom's been sad for a long time, even when she pretends she's not. You make her not sad." Denise felt tears threaten behind her eyes. She'd thought she'd hidden her loneliness from Tyler, but children saw everything, processed everything, carried their parents' pain in ways adults rarely recognized. Before she could respond, the lights went out. The house plunged into darkness, emergency lighting flickering on after a few seconds. Agent Chen's voice crackled over the communication system. "Power failure. All units to stations." "This is not a drill." Jonathan immediately moved to Denise and Tyler, his protective instincts overriding everything else. "Stay close to me." Outside, they could hear Agent Chen coordinating with her team. "Perimeter secure. Generator should engage in 30 seconds. But the generator never engaged. Instead, thick gray smoke began seeping under the front door, carrying with it the acrid smell of industrial chemicals. "Gas masks now," Agent Chen shouted, her voice filtering through the specialized equipment all federal agents carried. "Evacuate through the back exit." Chaos erupted as agents moved to secure their escape route. Denise grabbed Tyler, who had begun coughing as the chemical smoke filled the kitchen. Jonathan helped support them both, his own eyes streaming from the toxic fumes. "The back door's blocked," someone shouted from the rear of the house. "Unknown number of hostiles in body armor. They're using military-grade equipment." Agent Chen's voice cut through the confusion. "Safe room. Now, move." They stumbled through the house toward the reinforced panic room that had been built into the basement. Tyler was struggling to breathe despite the child-sized gas mask Agent Chen had quickly fitted over his face. Denise's maternal instincts overrode everything else as she focused solely on getting her son to safety. The safe room door sealed behind them with a solid thunk, the air filtration system immediately engaging to clear the toxic smoke from their small space. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows as Agent Chen worked to establish communication with the outside world. "Base, this is Safe House Alpha. We are under coordinated assault. Unknown number of hostiles using chemical weapons and military-grade equipment. Request immediate backup." The radio crackled with static before a familiar voice came through the speakers. Victoria Kane's words were distorted by electronic modulation, but her tone was unmistakably cold and determined. "Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Denise. I hope you're comfortable in your little bunker." Agent Chen grabbed the radio. "This is Agent Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are committing multiple federal felonies. Surrender immediately." Victoria's electronically altered laugh echoed through the safe room. "Agent Chen, always so by the book. I'm afraid surrender isn't part of my plan today." Jonathan took the radio from Agent Chen, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Victoria, whatever you think you're doing, it ends now. Let Tyler go. He's just a child." "Oh." Jonathan. Still trying to play the hero. Still convinced you can control outcomes through sheer force of will. Victoria's voice carried a coldness that sent chills through everyone in the bunker. "But you can't control this. None of you can. What do you want?" Denise demanded, pulling Tyler closer against her chest. "What I've always wanted. Justice. Revenge. The satisfaction of watching everything you both care about burn to the ground." Victoria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You cost me $15 billion, Denise. You destroyed 8 years of careful planning. You turned Jonathan against me. So now, you get to watch your son pay the price." The radio went silent except for static. Agent Chen immediately began working to establish contact with backup units, but the chemical attack had disrupted communications across the entire area. "She's jamming our signals," Agent Chen said grimly. "Standard protocol in this situation is to remain in the safe room until backup arrives. This bunker can withstand almost anything." "Almost anything?" Jonathan's voice was sharp. "The air filtration system is powered by the main electrical grid. If they cut power to the entire neighborhood..." As if summoned by her words, the emergency lighting flickered. Tyler whimpered against his mother's chest, his small body shaking with fear and residual effects from the chemical exposure. Denise felt something break apart inside her chest. The love she'd found with Jonathan, the hope she'd allowed herself to feel, the dream of a different life for Tyler, it was all crumbling around her in this red-lit bunker while a madwoman played games with their lives. "This is my fault," Jonathan said, his voice hollow. "I created Victoria Kane. I rewarded her ruthlessness, encouraged her ambition, never saw the monster I was helping to build. And now Tyler is paying for my blindness." "Don't," Denise said sharply. "Don't you dare blame yourself for her choices. Victoria Kane chose to steal money, chose to threaten children, chose to become a terrorist. That's on her, not you." "But You what? You trusted your business partner? You believed someone you'd worked with for 8 years." Denise's voice was fierce despite their circumstances. "Jonathan, you didn't make Victoria into a sociopath. You just failed to recognize that she already was one." Tyler looked up at both of them, his young face serious despite the gas mask. "Are we going to die?" The question cut through everything else, reducing their situation to its most basic elements. A child asking if the adults who loved him could keep him safe from forces beyond anyone's control. "No," Jonathan said firmly, kneeling down to Tyler's eye level. "No, we are not going to die." Victoria Kane underestimated something very important. "What?" "How far people will go to protect someone they love." Jonathan looked at Denise, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. "Your mother and I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." Agent Chen's radio crackled back to life. Victoria's distorted voice filled the bunker again. "I'm going to give you a choice, Jonathan. A very simple choice. You can stay in your little bunker and watch it become Tyler's tomb when the air filtration system fails in approximately 20 minutes. Or you can come outside, alone, and we can settle this properly." "It's a trap," Agent Chen said immediately. "Standard terrorist protocol. They isolate the primary target to eliminate federal protection." Jonathan was already moving toward the bunker door. "Maybe. But I won't let Tyler suffocate because Victoria Kane wants revenge against me." "Jonathan, no." Denise grabbed his arm. "You can't trust her. The moment you leave this bunker, she'll kill you and then come after Tyler anyway." "Maybe," Jonathan admitted. "Or maybe she'll honor whatever twisted code she's operating under. But I know one thing for certain. If I stay here and Tyler dies because our air ran out, I'll never forgive myself. Tyler pulled off his gas mask, his voice small but clear. Mr. Cross? If you go out there, will the bad lady leave my mom alone? The innocent question struck everyone silent. Even Agent Chen, trained to handle hostage situations, seemed stunned by the child's instinctive understanding of the sacrifice being contemplated. That's the idea, buddy, Jonathan said gently. Victoria Kane is angry at me, not at you or your mom. If I face her, she might leave you both alone. But what if she hurts you? Jonathan felt his throat tighten. In less than 3 weeks, this remarkable child had become more important to him than his billion-dollar empire, more precious than any acquisition or financial victory he'd ever achieved. Then you take care of your mom for me, okay? You keep being brave and smart and kind, and you remember that someone loved you both enough to try. Denise was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she watched the man she loved prepare to sacrifice himself for her son. Jonathan, please. There has to be another way. If there is, I can't see it. Jonathan cupped her face in his hands, memorizing her features. Denise, you changed my life. You made me remember what it means to be human. Whatever happens out there, I want you to know that loving you and Tyler has been the most important thing I've ever done. He kissed her gently, tasting salt from her tears. When they broke apart, his blue eyes held a peace she'd never seen before. Take care of each other, he said simply. Then Jonathan Cross, Billionaire CEO, opened the bunker door and walked out to face the woman who'd once been his most trusted partner and was now his most dangerous enemy. The bunker door sealed behind him with a finality that sounded like a death knell. Outside, Victoria Kane was waiting. Sometimes love means making impossible choices. The chemical smoke had cleared from the house, leaving behind the acrid smell of burnt electronics and shattered glass. Jonathan Cross stepped through the wreckage of what had been their sanctuary, his hands raised but his spine straight. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn where Victoria Kane stood waiting, flanked by 6 men in military-grade tactical gear. She looked different than the polished business partner he'd known for 8 years. Gone was the perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive red suits. This Victoria wore black tactical clothing, her hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the cold calculation in her eyes. She held a military-grade assault rifle with the casual competence of someone who'd been trained in its use. "Hello, Jonathan," Victoria said, her voice no longer electronically distorted. "You look older. Prison food not agreeing with you? Oh wait, you haven't been to prison yet. My mistake." "Let them go, Victoria," Jonathan said quietly, stopping 20 feet from her position. "Tyler is 10 years old. Whatever you want from me, he doesn't deserve to pay for it." Victoria's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Deserve? Let's talk about what people deserve. I deserved recognition for building Cross Dynamics alongside you. I deserved credit for the deals I negotiated, the profits I generated, the empire I helped create. Instead, I got to watch you take interviews about your company while I remained in the shadows." "You could have talked to me," Jonathan said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "If you felt undervalued." "Talk to you." Victoria's voice rose with genuine fury. Like Denise Parker talked to Pinnacle Industries when she discovered their fraud? How did that work out for her? 3 years serving wine to people like us because she tried to do the right thing. Jonathan felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. "You're right. The system is rigged. I benefited from that system, perpetuated it, used it to build my fortune. But terrorizing innocent people won't fix anything." "Innocent?" Victoria stepped closer, her weapon still trained on Jonathan's chest. Jonathan Cross, the man who destroyed countless small businesses through hostile takeovers? The man who fired thousands of employees to boost quarterly profits? The man who looked at a hard-working woman and saw only a servant whose annual salary couldn't buy his wine? Each accusation hit home because each one was true. Jonathan felt the weight of every ruthless decision, every cruel dismissal, every moment when he'd chosen profit over human dignity. "You're right about all of it," he said quietly. "I was a monster who justified everything in the name of success. But Denise and Tyler aren't responsible for the man I used to be. No, Victoria agreed. But they're responsible for the man you're pretending to be now. The reformed billionaire, the loving boyfriend, the father figure. It's all performance, Jonathan. When pressure comes, you'll revert to type. You always do. Inside the bunker, Denise pressed her ear against the ventilation grate, straining to hear the conversation outside. Agent Chen monitored her radio equipment while Tyler sat quietly in the corner, his young face showing a maturity no child should possess. The air filtration system is failing, Agent Chen announced grimly. We have maybe 10 minutes of breathable air left. Can't you override the system? Denise asked desperately. Not without external power, and they've cut the main grid. Agent Chen's voice was professionally calm, but Denise could see the tension in her posture. Backup units are en route, but they're still 15 minutes out. Tyler looked up at his mother, his dark eyes serious. Mom, if we don't get out of here, will you tell Mr. Cross something for me? Denise felt her heart break. Tyler, we're going to get out of here. All of us. But if we don't, Tyler persisted with the stubborn logic that had always characterized his personality, will you tell him that I'm glad he loves you? That I think he's a good man even though he made mistakes? Tears streamed down Denise's face. Baby! And tell him that if something happens to us, it's not his fault. Sometimes bad people do bad things, but that doesn't make it the good people's fault. Agent Chen looked away, her professional composure cracking at the child's wisdom. Outside, Victoria continued her psychological assault on Jonathan, circling him like a predator toying with wounded prey. Do you want to know the real reason I plan to destroy Cross Dynamics? Victoria asked conversationally. It wasn't about the money, though $15 billion would have been nice. It was about proving that your success was built on my foundation. Without me, you would have remained what you always were, a scared little boy from a trailer park, desperate for approval. Jonathan absorbed the words without flinching. A month ago, they would have devastated him. Now, having experienced Tyler's unconditional acceptance and Denise's transformative love, he understood something Victoria couldn't comprehend. You're wrong, he said simply. My success wasn't built on your foundation. It was built on fear. Fear of being poor again, fear of being dismissed, fear of being seen as worthless. You didn't create that fear, Victoria. You just fed it. And now, what's changed? Victoria's voice carried genuine curiosity along with its malice. Jonathan thought about Tyler teaching him that family mattered more than work. About Denise showing him that dignity wasn't earned through wealth but demonstrated through character. About love that asked nothing and gave everything. Now I know the difference between success and worth, he said quietly. I know that a 10-year-old boy's respect matters more than a board of directors' approval. I know that loving someone means protecting them even when it costs everything. Victoria's expression hardened. Pretty words, Jonathan. But when faced with an actual choice, you'll choose self-preservation. You always have. Then test me, Jonathan said, surprising her with the steel in his voice. What's your endgame, Victoria? What choice are you offering? Victoria smiled, and the expression was more frightening than her anger had been. It's simple. You get to choose who lives. You can save Denise and Tyler by walking away right now. Leave Cross Dynamics. Leave your fortune. Leave your life in America. Disappear completely, and I'll let them go. And if I refuse, then everyone dies. Them, you, and every federal agent who tries to stop me. Victoria gestured to her tactical team. I have enough explosives to level this entire block. Military-grade equipment, offshore funding, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Jonathan felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. Everything he'd built over 20 years of ruthless ambition, gone. His company, his fortune, his identity as one of America's most powerful CEOs, erased as if it had never existed. Against that, he weighed Tyler's laugh at breakfast that morning. Denise's tears when she'd told him about her destroyed career. The feeling of being loved not for what he owned but for who he was becoming. There's a third option, Jonathan said carefully. Victoria raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. You take me instead. Kill me right here, right now, and let them go. You get your revenge, and they get to live. Martyrdom, Jonathan? How unlike you. Not martyrdom, Jonathan corrected. Love. Something you never understood despite being surrounded by it for 8 years. Victoria's finger tightened on her weapon's trigger. Love. You think what you feel for Denise Parker is love? She's a project, Jonathan. A way to rehabilitate your image. When the novelty wears off, when her son becomes an inconvenience to your lifestyle, you'll discard them both. Will I? Jonathan asked, and Victoria was surprised to hear genuine uncertainty in his voice. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm incapable of the kind of selfless love Tyler deserves from a father figure. Maybe I'm too damaged by years of treating people as disposable resources. Victoria nodded, sensing victory. Exactly. So why die for something that won't last? Because, Jonathan said, his voice gaining strength, even if I fail them eventually, even if I revert to the selfish bastard I used to be, Tyler and Denise deserve the chance to find out. They deserve to live their lives without paying for my sins or yours. Something flickered across Victoria's face, an emotion too quick to identify. You're really willing to die for them? Yes. Even though you've known them for less than a month? Especially because of that, Jonathan said. In 3 weeks, they changed me more than 8 years with you did. That's not their fault, Victoria. That's yours. And mine. Victoria stared at him for a long moment, and Jonathan saw something he'd never expected. Uncertainty. For the first time since this confrontation began, she seemed to be genuinely considering his words rather than simply waiting for her turn to speak. You know what the real tragedy is? Victoria said finally, lowering her weapon slightly. If you'd shown me half the respect you've shown her, if you'd valued my contributions the way you value her warnings, none of this would have happened. You're right, Jonathan admitted. I failed you as a partner and as a human being. But Victoria, this won't bring back the recognition you deserved. This won't undo the years of being overlooked. This will just create more victims. Victoria's radio crackled. One of her tactical team members reported that backup FBI units were approaching the perimeter. Time was running out for everyone involved. Choose Jonathan, Victoria said, raising her weapon again. Walk away from everything and let them live, or die right here and hope I'm feeling merciful. Inside the bunker, the air was becoming dangerously thin. Tyler had stopped talking, conserving oxygen with an instinct that broke Denise's heart. Agent Chen worked frantically with her radio equipment, but interference continued to block their communications. Mom, Tyler whispered. I can hear Mr. Cross talking outside. He sounds scared. Denise pressed her ear to the ventilation grate again, catching fragments of conversation between Jonathan and Victoria. When she heard Jonathan offer to die in their place, something inside her chest shattered and reformed simultaneously. Agent Chen, she said urgently, is there any way to get out of this bunker? The door locks can only be opened from outside, and the walls are reinforced concrete. We're sealed in until... Denise wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about Tyler's words. Sometimes bad people do bad things, but that doesn't make it the good people's fault. She was thinking about Jonathan's transformation from cruel dismissal to sacrificial love. She was thinking about choices and consequences and the difference between being a victim and being powerless. Tyler, she said quietly, I need you to stay here with Agent Chen. Can you do that for me? Tyler looked up with eyes that seemed far older than his 10 years. You're going to help Mr. Cross. I'm going to try. Be careful, Mom. I need you both to come back. Denise kissed her son's forehead, tasting the salt of her own tears. I love you, baby. More than anything in this world. Then Denise Parker, former corporate executive turned waitress turned federal witness, began looking for a way to save the man who'd learned to love her son. Outside, Jonathan faced the most important choice of his life, while the woman who'd once been his partner decided whether mercy was possible or if revenge was the only justice she could accept. Time was running out for everyone. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. The maintenance shaft that Denise discovered behind the water heater was barely wide enough for her shoulders, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Agent Chen had tried to stop her, arguing it was suicide to leave the bunker's protection, but Denise's maternal instincts overrode every rational consideration. "If Jonathan dies trying to save us," she told Agent Chen, "and Tyler grows up knowing I did nothing to help, then we've already lost everything that matters." Now she crawled through the narrow space, her emerald uniform torn and dirty, following the shaft toward what she hoped was an exit point near the house's rear entrance. Tyler's voice echoed in her mind. "I need you both to come back." Above ground, Jonathan faced Victoria across 20 feet of scorched lawn, the morning sun casting their shadows in stark relief. Victoria's tactical team maintained their positions, weapons trained on Jonathan, while their leader struggled with a decision that had become far more complex than she'd anticipated. "You really believe it, don't you?" Victoria said, her voice carrying a strange mixture of admiration and disgust. "You actually think love can transform someone like you into someone worthy of redemption?" "I don't know if I'm worthy," Jonathan admitted. "But I know they are. Tyler is the best person I've ever met, and Denise has more integrity in her little finger than I had in my entire body before I met her. If dying means they get to live, then it's the first truly worthwhile thing I'll have done with my life." Victoria's finger tightened on her weapon's trigger. "Pretty speech, Jonathan. But you're still the same man who built his fortune on the broken dreams of small business owners. You're still the same man who looked at Denise Parker and saw a servant whose annual salary couldn't buy your wine." "Yes," Jonathan said simply. "I am that man. But I'm also the man who learned long division problems can be more important than board meetings. I'm the man who discovered that earning a child's respect matters more than earning another $1 billion. I'm both men, Victoria. The question is which one I choose to be in my final moments." Behind Victoria, Detective Frank Morrison appeared at the tree line with a team of federal agents. Victoria's tactical team immediately swung their weapons toward the new threat, creating a Mexican standoff that could explode into violence at any moment. "Victoria Kane," Detective Morrison's voice carried across the lawn through a bullhorn. "You're surrounded. Release your hostages and surrender peacefully." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Surrounded? Detective, I have enough explosives to level this entire block. One signal from me, and everyone dies. Your hostages, your agents, your righteous billionaire. Everyone. What's your endgame, Victoria?" Jonathan asked, genuinely curious. "Even if you kill all of us, even if you escape, then what? You'll spend the rest of your life running, looking over your shoulder, knowing that you murdered innocent people for revenge." "Maybe," Victoria said. "But at least I'll know that you paid for what you did to me. At least I'll know that your perfect redemption story ended in blood and failure." The radio crackled on Victoria's tactical vest. One of her team members reported movement near the house's rear entrance. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she processed the implication. "Someone's trying to escape the bunker," she said, gesturing to two of her men. "Find them. Bring them back alive. I want Jonathan to watch them die before I kill him." But before her team could move, Denise Parker emerged from behind the house, dirty and disheveled but moving with determined purpose. She carried something in her hands that made Victoria's blood run cold, a dead man's switch connected to what appeared to be an improvised explosive device. "Hello, Victoria," Denise said calmly, walking slowly toward the center of the confrontation. "I believe you and I need to have a conversation." Victoria's tactical team immediately trained their weapons on Denise, but she continued walking as if she were strolling through a park rather than into a potential firefight. "Ms. Parker," Detective Morrison's voice crackled over the bullhorn. "Step back. We have this situation under control." "No, you don't," Denise replied without taking her eyes off Victoria. "Because Victoria Kane is operating under the assumption that she has nothing left to lose. But she's wrong." Victoria's expression shifted from confusion to recognition as she focused on the device in Denise's hands. "Where did you get that?" "Your explosives expert wasn't as careful as he thought," Denise said, still approaching. "He left this little beauty right next to the bunker's air filtration system. One of those backup charges, I assume, in case the primary plan failed." Jonathan felt his heart stop. Denise, get back. You don't know what you're doing. Actually, I know exactly what I'm doing, Denise said, finally stopping 10 feet from Victoria. I'm calling her bluff. Because Victoria Kane isn't a terrorist or a revolutionary. She's a businesswoman who's been backed into a corner and is making emotional decisions instead of rational ones. Victoria's laugh held no humor. You think you can psychoanalyze me into surrender? I think I can offer you something better than revenge, Denise said simply. I can offer you justice. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Victoria's grip on her weapon remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes. Justice? From you. The waitress who destroyed my $15 billion payday. Justice from the system that failed both of us, Denise corrected. Victoria, we're not enemies. We're both women who were undermined by men who took credit for our work, who were pushed aside when we became inconvenient, who watched our contributions get erased from history. Victoria's weapon wavered slightly. Don't try to bond with me. We're nothing alike. Aren't we? You built Cross Dynamics alongside Jonathan while he got all the credit. I discovered corporate fraud at Pinnacle Industries and got fired for my integrity. We both sacrificed our careers for principles, and we both got punished for it. The difference, Victoria said, her voice tight, is that you stayed honest while I got smart. You kept believing the system would reward virtue while I learned to game the system for my own benefit. And how did that work out for you? Denise asked gently. You're standing here with a rifle, surrounded by federal agents, planning to murder innocent people. Is this the justice you wanted? Is this the recognition you deserved? Victoria's composure cracked slightly. I deserve to be acknowledged as Jonathan's equal. I deserved credit for the company we built together. I deserved respect, Denise finished. You deserved basic human respect. You're absolutely right. But Victoria, murdering Tyler won't get you that respect. Killing Jonathan won't erase 8 years of being overlooked. It will just make you a terrorist instead of a victim. Tyler's voice carried across the lawn, thin but determined. The boy had emerged from the bunker despite Agent Chen's protests, his small frame somehow commanding attention from armed adults. Ms. Victoria? Tyler called out, walking slowly toward the group. I know you're angry at Mr. Cross, and maybe you have good reasons. But my mom never hurt you, and I never hurt you either. So why do you want to hurt us? The simple question, asked with a child's devastating logic, stopped everyone cold. Victoria stared at Tyler as if seeing him for the first time. Not a strategic asset or collateral damage, but a 10-year-old boy who'd somehow found the courage to walk into a standoff to protect the adults he loved. Tyler, go back, Jonathan said urgently, but the boy ignored him. I heard you talking about recognition and respect, Tyler continued, stopping beside his mother. My mom taught me that respect isn't something you take from people. It's something you earn by being worthy of it. And you earn it by protecting people who are smaller than you, not by hurting them. Victoria's hands began to shake. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her grip as she stared at this child who'd somehow articulated the moral principles she'd abandoned years ago. I'm not a bad person, Victoria whispered, and for the first time, she sounded like the brilliant, ambitious woman Jonathan had once respected rather than the cold terrorist she'd become. I know, Tyler said simply. Bad people don't feel guilty about hurting others. You feel guilty, don't you? That's why you're angry. Because you know this isn't who you wanted to be. Detective Morrison watched the surreal scene unfold, his hand hovering near his weapon but recognizing that a 10-year-old boy was accomplishing what trained negotiators often couldn't. He was reminding the perpetrator of her humanity. Victoria lowered her rifle slowly, her breathing ragged. I wanted to matter. I wanted my work to be acknowledged. I wanted to be seen, Denise said gently. I understand, Victoria. I've spent 3 years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like my intelligence and experience meant nothing. But this isn't the way to be seen. Victoria looked around at the federal agents, the tactical teams, the news helicopters that had begun circling overhead. Everyone's watching now, she said with bitter irony. Finally, the whole world gets to see Victoria Kane. But not the Victoria Kane you wanted them to see, Jonathan said quietly. Not the brilliant businesswoman who helped build a billion-dollar company. Not the strategic mind who could have led her own empire. They're seeing the woman who threatened a child to get revenge. Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. The rifle fell from her hands as she collapsed to her knees, 8 years of suppressed rage and humiliation pouring out in harsh sobs. "I lost myself," she whispered. "Somewhere along the way, I became someone I don't recognize. Someone who would threaten children. Someone who would." Denise approached slowly, the explosive device still in her hands but her posture non-threatening. "It's not too late, Victoria. You can still choose who you want to be. The federal charges will be significant," Detective Morrison said, moving closer now that Victoria was no longer armed. "But cooperation, remorse, and the lack of actual casualties will matter. You could serve time and still have a life afterward. You could still find a way to matter that doesn't involve hurting innocent people." Victoria looked up at Tyler, this remarkable child who'd somehow found the courage to offer compassion to someone who'd threatened his life. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "Tyler, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have had to be braver than the adults." Tyler considered this gravely, then nodded. "I forgive you, Ms. Victoria. My mom says forgiveness doesn't mean what you did was okay. It just means we don't want anger to make us into people we don't like." As federal agents moved to take Victoria into custody, she looked one last time at Jonathan. "I really did help build Cross Dynamics, you know. I wasn't just along for the ride." "I know," Jonathan said sincerely. "And I should have acknowledged that years ago. I should have made sure the world knew what you contributed. I failed you as a partner, Victoria. I'm sorry." Victoria nodded, some of the bitterness leaving her face. "Maybe we both failed each other. Maybe we both forgot what really matters." 3 months later, the new headquarters of Cross Dynamics occupied a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn rather than a Manhattan skyscraper. The building was smaller, less imposing, but filled with natural light and the sound of genuine collaboration rather than cutthroat competition. Denise Parker Cross stood in her office, reviewing quarterly reports that showed consistent profitability alongside improved employee satisfaction scores. As Chief Operations Officer, she'd helped restructure the company around principles of transparency, employee ownership, and social responsibility. It wasn't the biggest tech company in America anymore, but it was becoming the most respected. "Mom, Mr. Cross, the reporter is here." Tyler's voice carried down the hallway. Now 11 years old, he spent afternoons at the office doing homework and charming employees who'd learned to value his honest feedback on company policies. Jonathan appeared in Denise's doorway, still handsome in his expensive suits but somehow warmer, more approachable than the man she'd first met. Marriage had changed them both, but not in ways that diminished their individual strengths. "Ready for the interview?" he asked, straightening his tie nervously. As ready as anyone can be to explain how spilling wine led to a federal investigation and a complete corporate restructuring, Denise replied with a smile. The Forbes reporter who'd come to write about Cross Dynamics transformation sat in the main conference room, surrounded by windows that looked out on Brooklyn's skyline rather than down on Manhattan streets. She was particularly interested in the company's new profit-sharing model and its partnership with worker advocacy organizations. "So, Mr. Cross," the reporter said, "critics suggest your company's new policies are more about public relations than genuine change. How do you respond to accusations that this is all performance?" Jonathan looked at Denise, then at Tyler, who was coloring quietly in the corner. 3 years ago, I measured success by stock price and market dominance. Today, I measure it by whether my employees can afford to send their children to college and whether Tyler still thinks I'm worthy of being called Dad. "And Mrs. Cross?" The reporter turned to Denise. "You've gone from serving wine to running operations at a billion-dollar company. Some might say that's quite a leap." Denise smiled. "The skills are more similar than you might think. Both jobs require attention to detail, the ability to read people accurately, and the knowledge that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. The difference is that now I'm in a position to ensure that dignity is built into company policy rather than just hoped for in individual interactions. Tyler looked up from his coloring book. Can I say something? The reporter, charmed by the boy's seriousness, nodded encouragingly. I think grown-ups make things too complicated sometimes, Tyler said thoughtfully. My mom and dad learned that people are more important than money, and that if you take care of people, they'll take care of your business. It's not that hard to understand. The reporter laughed. Out of the mouths of babes. Do you like having business executives for parents? Tyler considered the question gravely. I like that they learned how to be better people. And I like that they show other grown-ups that it's never too late to choose to be kind instead of mean. As the interview concluded and the reporter packed up her equipment, she paused to ask one final question. What happened to Victoria Kane? Is she still serving time? Jonathan and Denise exchanged glances. Victoria received a 7-year sentence, but she's been a model prisoner, Jonathan said. She's actually leading a program to help other white-collar criminals transition back into society. We correspond occasionally. She's finding ways to matter that don't involve hurting people. Any regrets about how everything turned out? Denise thought about the question seriously. I regret that it took a crisis to bring out the best in all of us. I regret that Tyler had to see adults behaving badly. But I don't regret the journey that brought us here. Sometimes the most broken things, when they're rebuilt properly, become stronger than they ever were before. That evening, after Tyler was asleep and the house was quiet, Jonathan and Denise sat on their back porch overlooking a garden Tyler had insisted on planting. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully, and the boy had announced plans to donate the harvest to a local food bank. Do you ever think about that day at Lou Bernardine? Jonathan asked, his arm around Denise's shoulders. Which part? The humiliation, the wine spill, or the moment I realized I was falling in love with a man who just treated me terribly? Jonathan winced. I was a monster. You were scared, Denise corrected gently. Scared of being seen as less than perfect, scared of acknowledging anyone else's worth because you thought it diminished your own. Fear makes people cruel, Jonathan. Love makes them brave. And which are we now? Denise leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, thinking about Tyler's laughter over breakfast and the employees who now own shares in the company they helped build. We're brave, she said simply. We chose love over fear, growth over stagnation, grace over revenge. We chose to believe that people can change, that second chances matter, that dignity is a birthright rather than something to be earned. Jonathan pressed a kiss to her temple. Think Tyler will approve when he finds out about the baby? Denise smiled, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. I think he'll be thrilled to be a big brother. He's been practicing his patience on all of us. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky. Somewhere across the city, Victoria Kane was probably reading in her prison cell, working toward a future that included redemption rather than revenge. Somewhere in Manhattan, former Cross Dynamics employees were running their own businesses, armed with profit-sharing models and worker protections they'd learned from their unexpected transformation. And here in Brooklyn, in a house filled with love and laughter and the promise of new life, 3 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances prepared for tomorrow with hearts full of hope. Sometimes the most important changes begin with the smallest moments. A careful hand reaching for an expensive bottle, a woman choosing dignity over safety, a man discovering that his greatest strength might come from his most unexpected teacher. The wine had been spilled. The contracts had been saved. The hearts had been healed. Love had conquered all. Sometimes the most broken stories become the most beautiful when love is given the chance to rewrite the ending. The congressional hearing room was packed with reporters, corporate executives, and environmental activists as Denise Parker Cross concluded her testimony before the House Subcommittee on Corporate Accountability. As the primary architect of the Corporate Whistleblower Protection and Compensation Act, she'd spent the morning explaining how the legislation would prevent future cases like her own. Mrs. Cross, the committee chairwoman said, your experience at Pinnacle Industries directly led to this historic legislation. How does it feel to know that future whistleblowers will have legal protections you didn't have? Denise adjusted the microphone, her voice steady and confident. Congresswoman Patterson, What happened to me was a personal tragedy that became a public catalyst. But the real victory isn't my story. It's the thousands of future employees who won't have to choose between their conscience and their livelihood because they'll have legal protection when they expose corporate fraud. In the gallery, Jonathan sat with 15-year-old Tyler and 3-year-old Sophie Cross, their daughter whose bright smile and curious nature had already charmed half the congressional staff. Tyler, now tall and thoughtful, whispered something to his little sister that made her giggle quietly. "Mama's famous," Sophie said in her stage whisper, causing gentle laughter throughout the room. After the hearing, the family walked through the Capitol building toward their waiting car. Tyler had grown into a remarkable teenager. His early wisdom matured into genuine leadership at his prep school, where he'd started a program pairing wealthy students with scholarship recipients to break down class barriers. "Mom," Tyler said as they descended the Capitol steps, "did you see the news about Ms. Victoria?" Denise nodded. Victoria Kane had been released from federal prison 6 months earlier after serving 4 years of her 7-year sentence. Her exemplary behavior and leadership of prisoner rehabilitation programs had earned her early release, and she'd immediately begun work with a non-profit organization helping formerly incarcerated women transition back into society. "She sent a letter last week," Jonathan added. Her non-profit received a major federal grant to expand their program nationwide. "She asked me to thank you for encouraging her toward rehabilitation rather than revenge." "And Mr. Brennan?" Tyler asked, referring to Thomas Brennan, Denise's former supervisor at Pinnacle Industries. "Sentenced to 3 years, served 18 months, Jonathan replied. The prosecution's case against the broader Pinnacle conspiracy was so strong that most defendants pleaded guilty and received reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. They reached their hybrid SUV, a practical family vehicle that reflected their changed priorities. Gone were the days of luxury sedans and conspicuous consumption. The Cross family lived comfortably but modestly, their wealth directed toward philanthropy and employee profit-sharing rather than personal indulgence. "Daddy," Sophie said from her car seat as they drove toward their hotel, "tell me the story about Mama and the wine." Jonathan and Denise exchanged amused glances. Their daughter's favorite bedtime story was a sanitized version of how her parents met, featuring a brave waitress, a grumpy businessman, and the magical moment when kindness transformed hearts. "Well," Jonathan began in the storytelling voice that delighted his daughter, "once upon a time, there was a very silly man who thought money was more important than people." As Jonathan spun the familiar tale, Denise reflected on the broader changes their story had catalyzed. The Pinnacle Industries case had resulted in the largest corporate fraud settlement in history, with $15 billion in fines and restitution directed toward environmental cleanup and victim compensation. More importantly, it had sparked congressional hearings that led to sweeping corporate accountability reforms. Cross Dynamics had become a model for ethical business practices, regularly hosting delegations from other companies seeking to implement similar profit-sharing and worker ownership programs. The company's success had proven that treating employees as partners rather than resources actually improved both morale and profitability. "And then what happened?" Sophie prompted as Jonathan paused in his story. "Then the brave waitress and the formerly grumpy businessman learned that the most important treasures aren't gold or silver, but love and family and helping others," Jonathan continued. "And they lived happily ever after with their wonderful children. Like us." Sophie clapped her hands delightedly. "Exactly like us," Denise said, reaching back to squeeze her daughter's hand. That evening, after Sophie was asleep and Tyler was video chatting with friends about a school environmental project, Jonathan and Denise sat on their hotel balcony overlooking the Potomac River. The Washington Monument glowed in the distance, a symbol of enduring principles that sometimes required struggle to maintain. "Margaret Thornton called yesterday," Denise mentioned, referring to the former Lou Bernardine owner. "She's opening a new restaurant and wants to implement our employee ownership model. She said watching what happened that day changed her perspective on how service workers should be treated." Jonathan smiled. Full circle. The place where it all started becomes a model for worker dignity. "Did I tell you about the scholarship fund?" Denise asked. "The one Tyler suggested for children of service industry workers? The one funding 50 college scholarships annually? Only about a dozen times," Jonathan teased gently. "I'm proud of him. He understands that privilege carries responsibility." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights reflect on the water. 5 years had transformed them from adversaries to partners to parents, from a story of class conflict to one of redemption and love. "Any regrets?" Jonathan asked, echoing a question that had become their evening ritual. "Only that it took a crisis to teach us what really matters," Denise replied, giving her standard answer. "But I've learned that the most beautiful flowers often grow in the most unlikely soil. And the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers," Jonathan added, thinking of Tyler's wisdom, Sophie's joy, and even Victoria's cautionary tale about letting ambition override humanity. The next morning brought news that would complete their story's impact. The Supreme Court had unanimously upheld the Corporate Whistleblower Protection Act, with the Chief Justice writing in the majority opinion that the courage of individuals like Denise Parker-Cross to speak truth to power represents the highest ideals of American justice and corporate accountability. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came in a handwritten letter delivered to their hotel that morning. It was from a young woman named Jennifer Rodriguez, a junior accountant at a major corporation who discovered her company was dumping toxic waste into a river system. "Mrs. Cross," the letter read, "I saw your testimony yesterday and wanted you to know that because of the law you helped create, I was able to report my company's environmental crimes without fear of retaliation. The cleanup has already begun, and my job is protected by federal law. You probably don't remember being a scared waitress carrying evidence in a manila folder, but that waitress saved my career and possibly saved lives. Thank you for showing us that doing the right thing is always worth the risk." Denise showed the letter to Jonathan and Tyler over breakfast, and she wasn't surprised to see tears in both their eyes. "You know what this means," Tyler said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your story isn't over. It's just beginning to inspire other people to be brave." As they prepared to return home to New York, where Cross Dynamics employees were eager to hear about the congressional hearing and Sophie was waiting with her grandmother, Denise felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal success and everything to do with lasting impact. The wine had been spilled 5 years ago in a Manhattan restaurant. But the ripples from that moment continued to spread, touching lives and changing systems in ways she could never have imagined when she was just a waitress carrying evidence of corporate fraud in a manila folder. Sometimes the most important moments in history begin with the smallest acts of courage. Sometimes love really does conquer all. And sometimes, the most broken things become the most beautiful when they're rebuilt with wisdom, compassion, and an unshakable belief that every person deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to make a difference. The Cross family's story was complete, but their impact would continue for generations to come. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.